Most of the fossil record was laid down in the sea. So it stands to reason that if we want to understand the fossil record, then we need to understand modern marine biology as well. Which is basically an excuse to go to the seaside and see what we can find. Care to join me? The easiest way to understand what's lurking under the waves is just to get your hands dirty and dive into these piles of rather smelly seaweed, because there's a lot more there than you might think at first glance. Armed with a hand lens and a little bit of knowledge, you'll very soon get your eye in on the various groups of animals that are so abundant, mixed up with the seaweeds growing amongst them, things like hydroids, bryozoans and sponges. You do have to accept that you're going to get some mighty strange looks, though. A lot of these animals actually look like seaweeds, though. This is hornwrack, or Flustra foliacea, an extremely common bryozoan. This is a colony of tiny little filter-feeding animals. If you look at them closely, you can see the individual cells that the animals lived in. And on top of it is another species of bryozoan called, I must look that one up. Oh, of course, it's Crisia eburnea. That's embarrassing. Still, one mustn't make a Crisius out of it. You might expect when you're beachcombing to find loads of different bryozoans, but in this case there were actually only 3 or 4 in the whole afternoon. And the most abundant was growing all over, little red algae especially. This is actually a really distinctive one. It's extremely hairy. It's called Electra pilosa, and pilosa means hairy. And this is very, very common, and you'll find it all around the coasts of Britain and probably northwest Europe for that matter. Like so many of these creatures, they're actually really beautiful when you see them closer. There's a lot more than just bryozoans though, and if you want to get anywhere with understanding these, you're going to need some books. So I've got a few. This is a sort of very basic introductory one that you might find in charity shops anywhere or buy it new. But this is a really lovely one. I say basic, but it's got a lot of decent material on a lot of the most common things you're likely to see. But if you want to get a bit further and you think you've got something that matches a picture, you might want to go on to something like this, which is a student's guide to the seashore and goes into a lot more detail of the species that you're likely to find around UK coasts. It's quite user-friendly, that one. Of course, if you want to really get a little bit further, then you're probably going to want things like the Handbook of the Marine Fauna of Northwest Europe, and this is a decent weighty tome. But there's no requirement to get anything, and no, they're not sponsoring me at all. These are just books that I happen to have and I use regularly. Anyhow, back to more of the things that turn up under the microscope when you take some smelly bits of seashore home with you. These delicate white branching structures, up to a few centimetres long normally, but often much smaller, are actually algae. These are seaweeds, calcareous algae, that actually have a skeleton made of calcium carbonate, so like the shells of mollusks and so on. And this is a thing called Corralina, which is very, very common around UK coasts. Next up, we have some cnidarians. These are the group that include jellyfish and sea anemones, but there's a much more subtle little thing called hydroids, which grow in abundance around these coastlines, often entangled with seaweeds or growing on top of them. And they have chitinous skeletons, and they are colonies. So the animals themselves are minute, living inside these little cups and branches. There's a lot of really lovely structures to look at when you see them up close, but you need magnification to see them. Many of these hydroids are actually very small colonies, and almost microscopic in some cases, but in some cases they actually get quite large animals, or colonies of animals, and this one is a thing called seabeard, which you sometimes get thrown up onto the beaches like we had yesterday. So this is part of a colony. It would have been much more elegant in life with lots of little side branches, but it gives you an idea of how big these animals can get. Or the colonies themselves. Individual animals, still tiny. Speaking of tiny, there was one thing that I really wanted to go and find some of, which are calcareous sponges. These are very small, delicate, extremely beautiful little things that you generally find attached to extremely fine, delicate filamentous seaweeds, red algae especially. And then you have to sort of search your way through them, and eventually you might find tiny little white specks, often just a few millimetres long, a bit like this one, just in there. When you zoom into these, you start to realise that they're very, very spiky. In fact, the whole thing is made of a dense mass of tiny, tiny little needles, just a fraction of a millimetre long. And these needles are the spicules. They're the skeleton of a calcareous sponge, made of calcium carbonate. And they're just, well, I think they're rather lovely, but, you know, I am strangely biased. Here's another one. This is Grantia compressa, the purse sponge. And it's got a very similar sort of structure, but rather than little spikes, the needles are a bit sort of broader. But you can also see this hole at the end. Sponges work by basically pumping water through minute pores in the side and then out this osculum, this large hole at the top, and filtering out any organic material that they can digest. So inside the space you can also see tiny little holes on the internal surface, which are the canals that lead out into this chamber in the middle and then out through the osculum into the water column. If you want to find sponges the easy way though, what you need are holdfasts. This is the holdfast of oarweed, where there's kelp and various other things have similar structures with these massive roots that they cling onto the sea floor with. And in amongst those roots is just a positive jungle of all sorts of stuff. And you can probably see already from there this grey material that's sort of forming weird networks between the roots. And those, it turns out, are all sorts of things, but in large part it's sponges. These sponges, though, are demosponges. These are the encrusting ones that are often bright colours that you find very commonly along rocky shores. And their skeleton is made of opal, silica, and you zoom into these and you start to find this much more typically spongy-like texture of this network of fibres that are made of lots and lots of tiny little needles with surrounding spaces in the body where the water can percolate through and be filtered. Here's another one which is really rather gorgeous. I'm not sure what this is yet, but I'll have to look that one up. But this one has these bundles of spicules much more well constrained into little fibres leading to this volcano-like structure where the osculum is. And here's yet another one. This one doesn't really seem to have spicules at all. It just has this fibre of organic material making it its skeleton. And this is what you get with bath sponges. It's one of the same group that you would actually use in the bath. And yet another. This one has the very clear osculum there, but when you look at the skeleton of this, you can see that it's made of these bundles of fibres with spicules embedded in them, but they're radiating out from the osculum. So you have a very different structure of the skeleton. You can hopefully see by now that there's a huge amount to be found just by going and looking, keeping your eyes open and looking for the small stuff. Because if there's one lesson to learn quickly in this sort of line of work, it's that almost everything is the small stuff. We're gigantic. We are unnaturally large in some ways, right? We are much bigger than the huge majority of biodiversity. So when you have an entire little world like this, think of it as a miniaturized forest with all the things that you might expect to be living there. So even on this, there are little sort of little tubes made by worms that cement sand grains together to live inside. Then there are bryozoans, there are hydroids, there are sponges, and that's just the things that are being washed up. So when you're trying to understand how this little ecosystem worked, then you have to also remember that it would have been full of little shrimps, arthropods, worms, all sorts of creatures that were living amongst this jungle. And it's endlessly fascinating. And that's just one algal holdfast. There are so many other different types of habitats in an environment like this as well. The shallow seas are endlessly diverse and rewarding. So you might find, for example, reefs made by the honeycomb tube worm, This is colonies of worms that cement sand grains together and actually build up into solid structures. Or you might start looking at the sand itself. What is living amongst the sand grains? There's a whole world of minute shells, tiny little creatures which normally we don't see because they're beneath our notice. But I'll come back to that one. So I took a sample of this sand, so we're going to have a chance to see what's in it at some point, hopefully fairly soon. This is just a very brief introduction to what I get up to when I go to the seaside, but there's so much more to say about almost every aspect of it. So I'm planning to do lots more videos about different areas of investigation you might get deeper into, and it's an area that almost anyone can go and have a go at themselves. If you live anywhere near the seashore, then it's easy. Go out after a storm, see what's washed up. The more often you go out, the more extraordinary things you're going to turn up. If you don't, then at least you know where to go on holiday. Anyway, I will be back with plenty more things, but I hope you've enjoyed this, and if there's anything that you'd like to learn more about, or you'd like to see in more detail, then please just let me know. That's what the comments are for. So I'm looking forward to hearing your views, and hopefully I'll be entertaining you back again shortly. So, good night from me, and from him, or no, who knows. Good night.